thank Alderman for an excellent introduction. It's nice to be able to follow a politician and be able to genuinely say that I enjoyed his speech and agreed with many of the sentiments. 25 years, it's a long time. And many of us who set up Bien nearly 30 years ago remember the establishment of the Basic Income Network in the Netherlands. And it's a great pleasure to be able to see some of the founders in the room today. I was asking about Robert van der Veen, who organized our Amsterdam Congress, if some of you will remember, and I wish him all the best. He's not here today. But there are others here that deserve to be celebrated in their own right, including Ad, of course, and Alexander de Roo, my old friend. I'm very pleased to see him. I haven't seen him for a few years. To see him back in the heart of our movement is wonderful on a personal level. But there are many others I should be mentioning, but I apologize for not doing so. So it is a moment for reflection. And it reminded me, when I was thinking of what to say this morning, that when Bien had its 25th anniversary, something, maybe it was a drink or two, that led me to write a letter to all our life members. And I tried to concentrate on what sustains a movement. I think a movement has to go through a number of phases. And I was reminded of Albert Hirschman's great book on how all progressive ideas go through three phases, where first of all people dismiss it on grounds of futility. It won't work, it's useless. Then they go through arguments of perversity, that it will have unintended consequences, blah, 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 blah. And then it goes through the arguments of jeopardy. It will jeopardize other great ideas. And in the end, the idea becomes part of the common discourse and becomes accepted. And within a very few years after that, it's regarded as, of course. Of course, of course. And at the same time, I was reminded of something that Milton Friedman had written way back when the Mont Pelerin Society, in which he was a prominent member, were regarded as renegades. Now, most of us in this room would not agree with the Mont Pelerin Society and its neoliberalism, but his fundamental point was that you need to keep ideas alive. And he gave approximately 30 years when it goes from being impossible, ridiculous, absurd, to the point where it becomes inevitable. And he lived to the point where some of his ideas, and we regret that, came to be regarded as fruition. He became a Nobel Prize winner, given all sorts of awards with his friends, and so on. We haven't quite reached the point of 30 years, but we're getting close. And any of us who've been in the movement in this period will feel, I think, a sense of dramatic change in the atmosphere. We are no longer regarded as mad, bad, and dangerous to know. That's gone a long time ago. Every single day, you will hear of some prominent person who's decided that they've just invented the idea of a basic income. It's wonderful. I remember a congress in Brazil where Eduardo invited me to speak. And the first session of the Senate, everybody was attacking us. Remember, the second one, it was very funny. I was on the rostrum, and a whole series of prominent Brazilian politicians, ministers and senators and so on, were rushing to the podium, one after the other, claiming it was their idea. 3 years before, they had been the ones attacking it. That's great. Let's not name names. It's wonderful that across the political spectrum, there's a rush for joining our ranks in one way or the other. My job this morning is to try and provide a little contextual background. Because most of us are friends and have known each other for many years, you will be glad to know I will not go through the standard arguments for and against. We know that, or we should. But I want to say that I think I'm rather fortunate in having been involved in 4 major pilots of a basic income. In Namibia, in India, in 3 schemes in India, where we've actually put a basic income into practice. The thousands of people receiving a basic income, comparing what happens to them with thousands of similar people elsewhere. And the experience of doing it has been remarkable in various respects, not just the results, but in helping to legitimize the whole idea of a basic income with local intellectuals, local politicians, local bureaucracies, and most of all, local people. That is so important about where we are today. And many of the people who worked with us at the beginning of the Indian basic income pilots, and there's a book, if anybody's interested, on the results, most of them, I can say without fear of contradiction at the beginning, said, okay, Guy, we'll work on it. But to be honest, I don't really believe it. Today, all of those people are more passionately in favor of basic income than any of us in this room. I promise you. And I'm proud of them for adjusting. And they just established the Indian network of basic income. Hundreds of people are joining, and prominent people. And I would like it to be a message sent from the Dutch network and from Bien today, as we celebrate this 25th anniversary, to wish them every success, because I think they would appreciate that as a gesture. We know the journey is long. But at another point that I tried to make in that letter of the 25th anniversary is it's great to be part of such a journey. You make friends, the Greek idea of philia. You develop your ideas collectively to the point where anything Eduardo says, anything I say, anything Philippe says, anything Alexander, any of you in the room might say, you're never actually sure who gave you that idea. You may have done it yourself, I may have got it from you, you may have got it from somebody else. It belongs to some sort of collective argument. That is something precious that you get from a collective journey that we've been making. Of course, we've had our disappointments. Of course, we've faced insults. But having that sense of solidarity really reinforces what is so important. We know we are trying to do something that is ethically and morally desirable. Something respectable. Something that we can say to our grandchildren, I stood up. That's great. But to do it together makes it even greater. Now I want to say a couple of more things that have struck me recently. One is that I think we need to strengthen the distinction of why we support a basic income between the idea that it should be a substitute for other forms of social protection, partially or wholly, in favor, instead of old social insurance or universal, whatever it might be, and the idea that we want a basic income because we want to redistribute access to resources and access to freedom. That is different. It's complementary, but too often I think we get into a situation where we're left arguing about the minutiae with social security specialists, when really our fundamentally strong ground is that we believe in a basic income as a mechanism for redistribution, for social emancipation, and for a dignified life in a good society. This is different but complementary. And that is why I've always liked, and right from the beginning in the early 1980s, I've always liked, and I still find myself using the term social dividend. A social dividend implies the idea of Thomas Paine and G.D.H. Cole and others. A dividend that's a return on the investments and achievements of our ancestors, who produced the wealth that we all share, except that we share it unequally. And we don't know whose ancestors contributed to our collective wealth. A social dividend is like a return on our ancestors' efforts. But the name problem still persists within our own ranks as much as in popular debate. We still find ourselves using the term basic income. Others use citizens' income. Some use universal basic income. Some use unconditional basic income. I've never felt happy with this plethora of words. And in particular, I've never felt happy with any of the prefixes to basic income. Because each one of those prefixes actually raises awkward questions. If you use the term citizens' income, that must mean you're wanting to exclude certain people. If you're using the term unconditional basic income, excuse me, but we're being dishonest, intellectually and logically. Because we do believe in conditions, but very limited conditions. We believe that you should obey the law. We believe that you should be a legal resident. Or do we? Or don't we? We always, if you use the term unconditional, you raise issues that are problematic. But I've long come to conclude that we're going to have to live with those plethora of words and deal with them as best we can as we go along. The same applies with full and partial basic income. I've been working on this subject for more than 30 years, and I have a confession. I'm sorry, it shows my deficiency, but I still don't actually know the difference between full and partial. I'm sure you can define it in some way, but I can't satisfactorily. I believe in a basic income. What that means as it goes forward is something for us to see as we go forward. The same problems I have with another popular term associated with Tony Atkinson in particular, of a participation income. Participation in what? For what? For how long? By whom? All of these questions allow a neoliberal or a moralistic, paternalistic politician to say, ha ha ha, yes, if you participate in a workfare scheme, then you're deserving of a basic income. It's always a problematic development when you use such terms. I actually do believe in one condition. In my books, I've proposed it. You may oppose it. But I think most of us do believe in some sort of condition. The condition I believe in is that today we are faced by a crisis of thin and commodified democracy. And in those circumstances, we need to encourage people to be citizens, to be participating in society. And that is why I've argued in the book on the Precariat Charter that in order to strengthen deliberative democracy, once people start receiving their basic income, they write a statement or sign a statement making a moral, not a legal binding, a moral commitment to participate in politics in some way. And participating in meetings on political issues like the ancient Greeks would have done it, or in some way. It's a conditionality. But it's not a conditionality that distorts the market. It's not a conditionality that affects one group and disadvantages them in some way in the labour market. Now, I just want to say a few words on what is my narrative. I won't go into any detail, but I think it's provided us with a unique opportunity to make progress towards a basic income. And that is that we're undergoing a global transformation in which a global labour market is developing. Inequalities and insecurities are multiplying, like the Alderman said, and technology is having a huge effect on inequality. I disagree with the argument that robots and technology are going to remove all the need for work. I think this is bunk. I'm a Luddite, in the best sense. The Luddites objected to the technological changes of their age because they saw it as disrupting their way of life, disrupting the ability for themselves to be able to have community and solidarity and reciprocities of society. That was their objection. Today, technology is changing the character of work. Of course, it always disrupts some jobs and creates a whole lot of other jobs. That's always been the case. And what is unique about this technological revolution is what's being called heteromation. In other words, it is generating a whole lot of extra work that is not labour. Work that people have to do that don't get remunerated. Big problem for a basic income movement. I was recently invited to Silicon Valley to speak about basic income and the precariat. And in all of these high-tech whiz kids, every single one in the room, either billionaires or multi-millionaires, I felt completely alienated. And I talked about basic income, and what was remarkable is that most of them got it. Most of them said, look, if we don't have a basic income, the inequalities and insecurities that we are generating inadvertently will become explosive. They were sensible enough to see that. What they were not very nice to me about is that they took me to a laboratory and they arranged for me to have a debate with a robot. Now, I told a number of my friends about this because what they didn't tell me was that they were videoing my debate with the robot. And it was very interesting because the robot showed an ability to do salsa and Tai Chi that would disgrace most of us in this room, but also started to argue very coherently about the precariat, which I thought was pretty good because he got the accent right and everything. But in the end, I think everybody accepted that having a basic income made sense. Now we've got a situation where more than 40% of our population is today or will be tomorrow in the precariat, suffering declining real wages, an inability to get access to non-wage benefits or rights-based state benefits, having to rely on charity, which is one form of social protection that has been growing, or on privatized social policy, which is inadequate. More and more they are rejecting the old social democrats. They're rejecting the neoliberals. Some atavistically are going to support the Donald Trumps or your crazy politicians on the far right and others everywhere. And some are waiting for a new progressive politics. We must appeal to that third group. And today, as we know, we are faced with a political crisis unprecedented in most of our lifetime, where the far right is gaining and gaining and gaining, and dragging politicians of the centre further and further to the right. A basic income must be part of the progressive response. It's moved from the point of being desirable, for reasons that many of us in this room have articulated many times, to being essential. Because unless we give basic security to all our people, that disgusting far right populism that today is with the Trumps will very soon be spreading amongst us all, even in civilized places like Maastricht. I think basic income has a new political urgency. That leads to my last couple of points. I strongly believe that pilots are essential at this stage. We are in an era of experimentation. There will be those amongst you who will say they're not necessary because the findings we know. That's not the reason why we need pilots. We need pilots to get political legitimation, to show how they work, why different variants work in different ways, and we need to know what things not to do, as well as what things to do. And I think it's going to be very important, as this era of experimentation that is rushing towards us, to make sure that every experiment starts with normative principles of social justice. Just as this person has said. Social justice principles are the basis of any viable pilot. In other words, we must have clear hypotheses and know why we are doing it. That is so important. And I think that tells us one point on which I'm going to stop, which is what we found in India above everything else. It's so important that everybody in a community, whether it's a small community or a big community, receives the basic income. It's not a matter of giving Eduardo a basic income and you not, and you and one and you not. The community effects of a basic income are at least as important as the individual welfare effects on nutrition and health and schooling and all those things that we emphasize in our research. The community effects include the emancipatory effects that I've written about recently, which are actually greater than the monetary effects of a basic income. So a pilot should be everybody in a community, and that principle is fundamental for a good design. I'd like to conclude by congratulating once again the Dutch for being leaders in our movement over the years and great examples of liberal thinkers and progressive thinkers. And congratulate Eduardo for appropriately getting a degree in a university that is celebrating a great event in our movement. It is a global one, it is a European one, and at the time of refugees, when people in politics and elsewhere are behaving with disgusting opportunism, we stand for something that offers a good society. Thank you very much.